Hi everyone, it is December 2019. I'm going to read excerpts from this chapter, and it's in a book, and I'm not sure what book, but it goes under the technological fix, how people use technology to create and solve problems. So I will link below to everything fixing the weather and climate, military and civilian schemes for cloud seeding and climate engineering. Cloud wars. Wait, missed something. James R. Fleming. Thank you, James, for doing the research and writing this piece because it really was very interesting and informative. I love learning new things. So I hope you will find it interesting, and no doubt some of you will learn something from this. It's it's not the complete history of weather modification, but an interesting part of weather modification. The nation, which first learns to plot the paths of air masses accurately and learns to control the time and place of precipitation, will dominate the globe. General George C. Kennedy, commander of the Strategic Air Command, 1947. Yes, they've been at it for a really long time, messing with the weather. So let me read those excerpts. There are a lot of them, but I find it interesting. Military planners generated scenarios back in, well, right after World War II, but they were generating scenarios long before that. Military planners generated scenarios causing heavy rains or snows using controlled precipitation as a delivery system for biological or radiological agents. Many of you have left comments saying that you got really sick right after it rained. Some things just make you go, Another scenario, diverting precipitation from one large geographic area to another to disrupt or improve the agricultural economy of the nation concerned and altering the global climate for military purposes. Tactical possibilities, dissipating cloud decks to enable visual bombing attacks, opening airfields closed by low clouds or fog, and relieving aircraft icing conditions based on the military and economic implications of the technique and the powers it promised its masters. Meteorologists advised the military to launch an intensive research and development effort for 3 decades until 1977, when the United States signed a United Nations Convention condemning the use of environmental modification as a weapon of war. The U.S. military enthusiastically supported research on new technologies of weather modification and control. After the United States signed the United Nations prohibition on the use of weather modification, environmental modification, that does not mean that the United States military gave up all their research. Okay, we're going to adhere to the treaty, and as you will learn as I read on, the United States would not sign it until it stated exactly what the United States wanted, which was a treaty unenforceable and a treaty with provisions that allowed them to continue weather modification. Okay. So, modern meteorology has overwhelming ties to the military. Now, I'm not sure if every one of you know, but the military has taken over weather all aspects of it. Do you know that Raytheon has all the weather sites and satellites, radar? It's from Raytheon that our meteorologists get their reports, their forecasting. And aren't they doing just a wonderful job? A charged atmosphere, advanced weather tech showcased at annual gathering of weather scientists. Raytheon's website. Let's see. I'm just going to read this. The company's weather tools and technologies range from highly sophisticated space sensors currently on orbit to the applications that drive weather warnings straight to users' phones. So all of those warnings that you get on your phone, it comes from Raytheon. Why is a military contractor sending you information about the weather? Because weather has been weaponized and the military has taken over. Yep. Ain't that great? So, during World War II, the United States Army, Air Forces, and the U.S. Navy trained approximately 8,000 weather officers. Personnel of the Army's Air Weather Service, AWS, an agency non-existent in 1937, numbered 19,000 in 1945. Wow. Okie dokie. That means they were doing an awful lot of research. 11,000 soldiers during the Cold War and Vietnam eras. The Air Weather Service. In 1954, the National Science Foundation, a survey of 5,273 professional meteorologists in America revealed that 43% of them were still in uniform or active duty. It's like the CIA taking over news, mainstream media news. Well, the U.S. military also took over meteorologists. I didn't know any of this. Almost a decade after the war, 80% of American meteorologists still had military ties. In 1958, the Committee on Meteorology of the National Academy of Sciences observed that the percentage of meteorologists with doctor's degrees was the lowest of any major scientific group, while the percentage of persons with no degree at all who were designated as meteorologists was the highest of any major scientific group. In other words, they're readers. Readers. They read reports about the weather from Raytheon. And those satellites and the radar that you see on mainstream media, it comes from Raytheon, a military contractor. In 1965, 2 decades after the war, the military had a larger budget than the Weather Bureau, $189 million compared to $104 million, which was a lot of money in that time, and 3 times as many people, 14,300 compared to 4,500 in weather service and research. Total meteorological budget of the U.S. Department of Defense was $188.9 million in 1965. This was larger than any other government agency. Wow. So they were doing a lot of work on weather. Yes. General Electric experiments in Project Cirrus. The modern era of weather modification began in the summer of 1946. The General Electric Research Laboratory in Schenectady, New York. William Schaefer, who worked for, or I'm sorry, perhaps didn't work for, but a William Schaefer dropped a block of dry ice into a home freezer unit and to his surprise instantly transformed a cold vapor cloud into millions of tiny ice crystals. Schaefer tossed 6 pounds of dry ice out the window of a rented plane and seeded a cloud over Greylock Peak in the Berkshires, Massachusetts, creating ice crystals and fall streaks of snow. It seemed as though the cloud almost exploded. The effect was so widespread and rapid. That's what Schaefer said. Bernard Vonnegut, who was at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, discovered that silver iodide smoke also seeded supercooled clouds. So, all of these people, including a man named Irving Langmuir, they did work for GE, or they were associated with GE, General Electric. So, a Nobel Prize winner, Irving Langmuir, senior scientist and an outspoken, enthusiastic promoter and popularizer of large-scale weather control, Langmuir expounded large-scale weather control of the arid Southwest being changed into fertile farmland, and of cloud seeding preventing all ice storms, all storms of freezing rain, icing conditions in clouds. And many people do, when they are working on new technologies, their intent is to benefit societies, not to harm them. But when the military comes along, well, anybody would know that this is going to be weaponized. This ain't going to be the benefit for people in societies, not at all. Announcement of progress in weather modification appeared in the General Electric Annual Report for 1947. This is what it said. Further experiments in weather control led to a new knowledge which it is believed now will result in inestimable There are some words I just can't pronounce. Okay. Benefits. A lot of benefits. Can't calculate all of these benefits for mankind. But cloud seeding was becoming a controversial issue back in 1947. Langmuir's exaggerated claims threatened to take the company into litigious territory. Well, they claimed they were exaggerated. So, when one of Schaefer's cloud seeding attempts coincided with an 8-inch snowfall in upstate New York, and the forecast from the Weather Bureau was fair and warmer, Langmuir claimed that chain reactions could be set off in warm cumulus clouds, that in one field trial a hurricane had changed directions within 6 hours because of seeding, and that in general all meteorologists needed to do was find the proper trigger to release the immense amounts of energy stored in the atmosphere. They were changing the direction of hurricanes back in the late 40s. Cloud seeding, creating 8 inches of snow. GE lawyers, fearing a deluge of property damage and personal inconvenience suits, tried to silence Langmuir. GE halted outdoor experimentation on cloud seeding. He instructed Langmuir's team to work with Project Cirrus, a classified project conducted by the U.S. Army Signal Corps, the Office of Naval Research, and the U.S. Air Force over a 1,000 square mile area north of Schenectady, New York. As stated in the GE contract, the general purposes of the project were to search for fundamental knowledge and a better understanding of the physics and chemistry of hydrometeor formation as an aid in operational forecasting of both local and long-range weather conditions, and to investigate the practicability of and the means for cloud modification for military purposes. Project Cirrus in the late 40s had an annual budget of $750,000. That was a lot of money. Okay. There is weather modification law. There have been suits starting back in the 1950 weather modification. What is really just very odd is that we do have all of this information. We've got laws, we've got rules, we've got regulations, we've got agencies that those who are going to be modifying the weather, well, they have to get a permit and they have to register with agencies. But we can't. Weather modification, you're crazy, you're a nut job. Okay. You can take a look at all of these cases. California, 1987 to 1990. Really? Tort liability? But Oklahoma, 1954. New York, 1950. Washington State, 1956. And it goes through, a summary of all of these cases. So, we're living a very bizarre time, that's for sure. Because of weather modification implications for the military, bogging down enemy troops in snow and rain, clearing airfields of fog at lowest cost, and infecting induced storms with bacteriological and radiological materials. Well, the U.S. military did not give up on researching and developing means to modify the weather. But are you getting this? Infecting induced storms? Do you think they're not doing that now? The results of Project Cirrus found that seeding did indeed produce striking visual changes in clouds, including dissipation of cold stratus decks of cloud. Experiments in New Mexico and secret military projects. Langmuir's most fantastic claim was that changes in the weather across the continent had been caused by a single silver iodide generator in New Mexico in 1950. The experiment, which coincided with severe flooding in the Ohio Valley and resulted in widespread property damage and fatalities, came to the attention of the highest echelons in the government and resulted in a number of secret projects. Noted meteorologist Peterson of the University of Chicago explained the situation as follows. For no profound reason, Langmuir had left a silver iodide generator somewhere in New Mexico and made arrangements with a local person to burn the generator on a weekly schedule. Using a set of readily available weather reports, Langmuir found that the rainfall had begun to vary in a weekly rhythm. The response was not just local, it was nationwide, and might well be of hemispheric proportions. The weekly injection of silver iodide from a single generator in New Mexico had excited a hitherto undiscovered natural rhythm of the atmosphere. Well, did it cause that flooding? Because I guess the atmosphere frequently exhibits a natural 7-day periodicity. Is that true? I don't know. The controversies continue. Private meteorological entrepreneurs operating primarily in the West and Midwest succeeded in placing nearly 10% of the land area of the country under commercial cloud seeding at an annual cost to farmers and municipal water districts of $3 to $5 million. In 1951, New York City was facing 169 claims, totaling over $2 million from Catskill communities and citizens for flooding and other damages attributed to activities of a private rainmaker, Wallace Howell. The city had hired Howell to fill its reservoirs with rain. And that's what our Western nations do. To this day, California, rainmaking, Southern California Edison, PG&E, water districts in California. They hire companies to produce rain to fill the reservoirs, but somehow, I guess they just never thought, hey, why don't we hire them to get rid of these fires? So, Howell had claimed that he succeeded, but when faced with the lawsuits, however, city officials reversed their position and commissioned a survey to show that Howell's rainmaking was ineffective. Lying just goes on and on and on and on. How could we not be the people of the lie? Everything's just been a lie. The plaintiffs were not awarded damages, but they did get a permanent injunction against New York City that ceased further cloud seeding activities. In the early 1950s, Irving Crick, private weather consultant, began cloud seeding operations for wheat farmers, ranchers, and stream flow enhancement projects on the Salt River in Arizona and the Columbia River in the Pacific Northwest. Crick was credited by the Bureau of Reclamation with an 83% enhancement of the river flow. At the height of his operations, Crick's company was conducting seeding operations covering 130 million acres of western land. 1950s. The debate over private and public experiments in weather control prompted Congress to establish an advisory committee on weather control in 1953. And it was chaired by a presidential appointee, retired U.S. Navy Captain Howard Orville. The committee recommended more vigorous government support for basic meteorological research, specifically in solar influences, global air circulation, dynamics of cloud motion, and the origin and movement of large-scale storms. It also recommended a dramatic increase in manpower. In the light of these recommendations, the National Science Foundation became, in 1958, the lead agency for federally supported research on weather modification. The Cold War era, strategy and tactics. Total amount of energy released by a single thunderstorm is equal to that of 20 kiloton atomic bomb. A mature hurricane of moderate strength and size releases as much energy in a day as that of about 20 megaton hydrogen bombs. Wouldn't militaries want to access that energy? Since weather warfare could perhaps be conducted cheaply, surreptitiously, and without polluting the environment with fallout, and since the Russians were probably going to master the technology anyway, it made good sense to military planners to attempt to control that weather. Yes, control it. General George C. Kennedy, yes, I read this quote in the very beginning, the nation which first learns to plot the paths of air masses accurately and learns to control the time and place of precipitation will dominate the globe. And Kennedy wasn't alone. Rear Admiral Louis de Flores, who developed a synthetic training device for Navy flyers during World War II, had a similar opinion. With control of the weather, the operations and economy of an enemy could be disrupted. Such control in a Cold War would provide a powerful and subtle weapon to injure agricultural production, hinder commerce, and slow down industry. De Flores advocated that government start now to make control of weather equal in scope to the Manhattan Project, which produced the first A-bomb. Eisenhower's weather advisor, which was Orville, published an influential article in Collier's in 1954 that included scenarios for meteorological warfare. Planes would drop hundreds of balloons, and they are doing that. Nano balloons. Planes would drop hundreds of balloons containing seeding crystals into the jet stream. Downstream, when fuses on the balloons exploded, the crystals would fall into the clouds, initiating rain and miring enemy operations. The Army Ordnance Department was investigating another technique, loading silver iodide and carbon dioxide into 50 caliber tracer bullets that pilots could fire into clouds. A more insidious technique would strike at the enemy's food supply by seeding clouds to rob them of moisture before they reached enemy agricultural areas. It is conceivable, and this is I think it's what the Army Ordnance Department said. It is conceivable that we could use weather as a weapon of warfare, creating storms or dissipating them as the tactical situation demands. We might deluge an enemy with rain to hamper a military movement or strike at his food supplies by withholding needed rain from his crops. This is what is happening right here in the U.S. Oh, wait, all over the world. They are targeting agricultural areas, destroying our economy, but destroying farming with the flash flooding. And then, of course, they have massive snow falls and a massive drop in temperature that affected harvest time. So, yeah. Orville's assessment total weather mastery would be possible only after 4 decades of intensive research. The spin-offs from this work, when combined with the maturation of electronic computers, would provide a completely accurate system of weather forecasting, perhaps within a decade. 4 decades. In the 50s. So we're in the 90s, 4 decades. And that's when they begin with HAARP. I think it's entirely probable that in 10 years, your daily weather forecast will read something like this: freezing rain starting at 10:46 a.m., ending at 2:32 p.m. Heavy snowfall 7 inches, starting today at 1:43 a.m., continuing throughout the day until 7:37 p.m. This sort of accuracy of prediction, even without weather control, would have major consequences for military operations. Threats that the Soviets were aggressively pursuing weather control helped fuel the rapid expansion of meteorological research in all areas during the Cold War era, with the support of watermen at the National Science Foundation. The atmospheric sciences began a period of rapid growth. That rapid growth included founding of many new university departments of atmospheric science and the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, and in the building of the National Center for Atmospheric Research, a national laboratory in Boulder, Colorado. Control of large-scale weather patterns. Sorry. It seems I've missed something. I apologize. But, yeah. Control the large-scale weather patterns before weekend. The result could even be more disastrous than nuclear warfare. So this, well, what was told to the public, the Cold War, right? Duck and cover baby boomers. Get under that school desk to save yourself from a nuclear bomb. Okay. Seems a little stupid, don't you think? But it was also, the race between the United States and the Soviets. Well, the United States and the Soviets, they were working hand in hand, and they were exchanging findings and research. So, Edward Teller, an expert on hydrogen bombs, but not on weather control, told the Senate Preparedness Subcommittee, please imagine a world where the Soviets can change the rainfall over Russia, and influence the rainfall in our country in an adverse manner. Oh my God. Henry Houghton, chairman of the Department of Meteorology. Oh man, I'm not doing this over, so I'll embarrass myself. Meteorology. Sorry. At MIT, expressed the same concerns at this hearing. I shudder to think of the consequences of a prior Russian discovery of a feasible method of weather control, an unfavorable modification of our climate in the guise of a peaceful effort to improve Russia's climate could seriously weaken our economy and our ability to resist. According to the Soviet academician, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time reading, but the Soviet Union was engaged in a struggle for meteorological mastery over nature. Yes, man becoming master of the earth. Does this remind you of one particular psychopathic nut job? How about this guy?
As a result, I think the people in the Congress are going sporting. And that is the call for a new frontier, a new vision. It calls for us taking the steps now that will make us no longer second in space and science. We've laid the predicate and the foundation for a space communication satellite that will permit the people of the world to see one television program at the same time throughout the world. Think about that kind of communication, and think about the opportunity that will provide.
And think about the control of a few over that communication that everybody is hearing all over the world. And they've succeeded. You know, everyone in their respective countries were all getting the same propaganda. We're all getting from mainstream media, CIA news. Yes, control of communication, but another type of control.
It lays the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather. And he who controls the weather will control the world.
And he who controls the weather will control the world. Yeah. We were hearing what they were planning a long, long time ago. Such mastery was but one aspect of the Soviets' great plan for the transformation of nature, announced by Stalin in 1948. Under this plan, the Soviet State Planning Commission controlled all activities devoted to expanding the Soviet economy by harnessing nature, opening new farmland, building new cities and hydroelectric installations, establishing shelter belts, and attempting to control the weather and climate. The Soviet Union had 3 or 4 times more meteorologists than the United States. As noted earlier, in 1965, the U.S. military employed 14,300 meteorologists. I've said that word forever, and suddenly I can't say it. What? And the Weather Bureau, 4,500. The total number of employees in the Soviet Hydrometeorological Service was in excess of 70,000. In 1974, 70,000, wow. In 1974, the U.S. National Weather Service had 6,000. Soviet meteorologists at 75,000. The issue of a geophysical arms race did not go away. In the late 1960s, Gordon MacDonald, professor of geophysics at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles, Pentagon confidant, and member of President Johnson's Science Advisory Committee, saw weather control, even severe storms such as hurricanes and typhoons, as just the beginning step in an escalating game of environmental and geophysical warfare. Potentially, belligerents could, for example, cut a hole in the ozone layer over a target area to let in lethal doses of ultraviolet radiation, manipulating the Arctic ice sheet to cause climatic changes or massive tidal waves, triggering earthquakes from a distance, and in general, manipulate the planetary environment and its geophysics on a strategic scale. During the Vietnam War, that's exactly what our military did. Cut a hole in the ozone layer over Vietnam. Either they wanted to do it or they did do it. Can't remember. But they sure did do a lot of damage in Vietnam, that's for sure. Okay, so, nor was the discussion total science fantasy. Military planners were interested in improved weather observation, understanding prediction, and control to support both current and future operational capabilities. Weather and climate modification research included both computer modeling of the atmosphere and new weather satellites. Nile Blue, a computer model developed by ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency, was used to test the sensitivity of the climate to major perturbations, including Soviet tinkering and those caused by a major environmental war. Newsweek reported that the United States would soon have a series of baby moons on its own. And that one of the eye-in-the-sky satellites designed by the Army Signal Corps would be used to monitor the Earth's weather from space. Military weather satellites would be useful in routine operational forecasting as support for the climate modelers and for more esoteric missions such as monitoring changes in global weather patterns. While most Americans worried about the race with the Reds, and the military speculated about the use of climatic and geophysical modification techniques such or as strategic weapons in future wars, operational cloud seeding was already being used tactically and covertly in the real war over the jungles of Vietnam. Cloud seeding in Indochina. In March 1971, nationally syndicated columnist Jack Anderson broke a story about Air Force rainmakers in Southeast Asia. Several months later, a document published in the Pentagon Papers confirmed that the government, after field trials in Laos, had begun cloud seeding operations in Vietnam in 1967 to reduce trafficability along enemy infiltration routes. This was done with the full and enthusiastic support of President Johnson, and it was the code name of it was Operation Popeye. Between 1967 and 1972, during the rainy southwest monsoon season, Operation Popeye attempted to create rain over portions of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam. They used a C-130 and other aircraft equipped with racks of up to 104 silver or lead iodide flares. The American Weather Service, or the Air Weather Service, flew over 2,600 sorties and expended almost 50,000 flares over a period of approximately 5 years at an annual cost of approximately $3.6 million. This information from a top secret Defense Department briefing in 1974 was made public several days later by Senator Claiborne Pell. And Senator Claiborne Pell held a hearing in 1974 on the military's use of weather modification. Yes, supplied by Department of Defense. The objective: increase rainfall sufficiently in carefully selected areas to deny the enemy the use of roads by softening road surfaces, causing landslides along roadways, washing out river crossings, maintain saturated soil conditions beyond the normal time span. Geez, that seems to be going on all over the world now. Senator Pell had asked the military, "You are not working on any of those far-out thoughts that have been brought out in testimony before? You are not working on any of these projects at this time?" Well, this Colonel Kean, of course. What? No, sir. What else? Okay. Is anybody from the military going to say, "Oh, yes, sir, we are. We are working on all of those projects"? Senator Pell, the development of typhoons, or the creation of earthquakes, or the melting of the Greenland ice cap? Any of that sort? No, sir. Another man associated with the military, Mr. Dolan, or no, he wasn't a senator. Anyway, he said that would really be what you would call climate modification rather than weather modification. Colonel Kean said the lead agency in the tropical storm modification program is the Department of Commerce. The program is called Storm Fury. Here. Weather modification study. This is only the transcript from that hearing. You can only find, well, I only found just little bits of it. But Senator Pell was asking about those typhoons, the earthquakes, the melting of the ice caps, because that's exactly what our military was already researching and planning. Well, now we have strange earthquakes, very destructive earthquakes, and the ice caps, the typhoons. It's all happening. Here, as far as you know, then we have not conducted any weather modification activity over Cuba? No, sir. No, sir. Well, there was a horrific drought in Cuba. So one would speculate that it was our Department of Defense. Some reports Operation Popeye induced from 1 to 7 inches of additional rain along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. No scientific data were collected to verify the claim. General William Westmoreland, baby boomers, remember that name? Thought there was no appreciable increase in rain from the project. No, oh man, was there. Even if the cloud seeding had produced a tactical victory or two in Vietnam, it did not. The extreme secrecy surrounding the operation and the subsequent denials and stonewalling of Congress resulted in a major strategic defeat for military weather modification. Westmoreland was one of only 4 general officers in Southeast Asia privy to the details of Operation Popeye. The governments of Thailand, Laos, South Vietnam were not even informed, nor were American ambassadors to those countries. Typical of the cover-up during this period was the Air Weather Service Annual Survey Report on Weather Modification for 1971, which documented 5 fog dispersal projects in the United States and Germany, and a rain-making effort in Texas, but contained no mention of Operation Popeye. The prime example of stonewalling came from Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, who told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 1972 that there was no cloud seeding going on over North Vietnam, but never mentioned that Operation Popeye was still functioning over Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam. Wow. So, they still just deny weather modification, even when we have a tremendous amount of evidence today that that's exactly what militaries are doing all over the world, not just the United States military. You know, baby boomers, remember Woodstock? This is all during the same time period. Remember Woodstock? Come on.
Oh, yeah. Right later. I got something to say. I want to know how come the fast speakers can see clouds. No, twice. With all the smoke coming out of the sea clouds. I want to know why that stuff going down. Why does the media report that stuff to the people, man? I'm telling you what happened. They played stuff over down in there, and they threw it out in the clouds. People of unknown origins were seeing the clouds. I don't know what they hope for.
Woodstock. Rained out. Whole lot of mud. I love German Shepherds. A whole lot of mud. And there were baby boomers who knew that our military was already geoengineering those skies, already modifying the weather. So when you look back and learn, wow, okay, Woodstock. So I think back on when I was younger. How much of our weather was already being created or modified by our military decades ago, when they could already produce a tremendous amount of rain, flooding out Woodstock. So, Operation Popeye, made public as it was at the end of the Nixon era, Operation Popeye was called the Watergate of weather warfare, but it was neither the first use of weather modification as a weapon of war. April 22nd, 1954, the French High Command announced it will try to wash out Vietnamese communication routes from Red China with man-made rainstorms as soon as cloud conditions permit. Moreover, according to the testimony of a former CIA agent, the agency seeded clouds in South Vietnam as early as 1963 in an attempt to disperse demonstrating Buddhist monks when they noticed that the monks resisted tear gas but disbanded when it rained. One alleged, but Pentagon sources denied, that weather modification was also attempted against Cuba during 1969 and 1970 in an attempt to cause a damaging drought. The dominant opinion, however, was that seeding clouds, like using Agent Orange or the Rome plow, setting fire to the jungles, or bombing the dikes over North Vietnam, was but one of many sordid techniques used in Vietnam. Some argued that environmental weapons were more humane than nuclear weapons. Others suggested that inducing rainfall to reduce trafficability was preferable to dropping napalm. As one wag put it, make mud, not war. Philip Handler, president of the National Academy, represented the mainstream of scientific opinion, however, when he observed, "It is grotesquely immoral that scientific understanding and technological capabilities developed for human welfare to protect the public health, enhance agricultural productivity, and minimize the natural violence of large storms should be so distorted as to become weapons of war." Yeah, I kinda agree. Weather modification budget, as reported by the Department of Defense, averaged about $1.5 million per year in constant 1967 dollars and reached zero by 1979. In 1962, however, the only year ARPA reported its budget, the expenditures reported were an additional $1.8 million. A request for the weather modification and cloud physics budgets of ARPA and its successor, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, from 1961 to 1978, filed under the Freedom of Information Act, resulted in a no-record response. Yes. No response. Outlying environmental modification as a weapon of war, 1972 to 1977. So, 1972, Senator Claiborne Pell introduced a resolution calling upon the United States government to negotiate a convention prohibiting the use of environmental or geophysical modification activities as weapons of war. Testifying at the Senate hearings, Richard Reed, president of the American Meteorological Society, cited earlier bans on chemical and biological warfare and atmospheric nuclear testing, and urged the government to present for adoption by the United Nations General Assembly a resolution pledging all nations to refrain from using weather modification for hostile purposes. Despite the opposition of the Nixon administration, the Senate adopted the resolution within a year by a vote of 82 to 10. Representative Donald Frazier led a parallel effort in the House. Feeling the growing pressure from Congress and the President, and the press, President Nixon directed a committee of the National Security Council to undertake a study of possible international restraints on environmental warfare. In May 1974, the committee presented the following options to the President. 1. No restraints. 2. Restraints on military use of environmental modification techniques having long-term, widespread, or especially severe effects. And 3. A comprehensive prohibition of hostile use. The administration favored option 2. What's option 2? Well, we still get to modify the weather because we don't know what those long-term, widespread, or severe effects are. Yeah. Within a month, the Soviet Union seized the diplomatic initiative by unilaterally bringing the issue of weather modification as a weapon of war to the attention of the United Nations. According to the Soviets, it is urgently necessary to draw up and conclude an international convention to outlaw action to influence the environment for military purposes. The draft convention, unveiled by the Soviet Union in September of 1974, forbid contracting parties from using meteorological, geophysical, or any other scientific or technological means of influencing the environment, including weather and climate, for military and other purposes incompatible with the maintenance of international security, human well-being, and health, and furthermore, never under any circumstances to resort to such means of influencing the environment and climate or to carry out preparation for their use. Now, do you think the Soviets were going to give up using weather as a weapon? Of course they weren't. Neither would the United States. So, one has to wonder if all of that was just a play on the world stage. The General Assembly decided that the subject deserved further attention and, with the United States abstaining, voted to turn it over to the conference of the Committee on Disarmament. To avoid further embarrassment, President Ford insisted on the language of the National Security Council's option number 2, of course, because option number 2 allows them to continue modifying the weather. The final treaty, the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques, applied only to environmental modification. The qualifiers, widespread, long-lasting, or severe, had found their way back into the convention. As the United States had hoped, the convention was vague and unenforceable. The AWS was of the opinion that the treaty's language was so vague that it did not affect its capabilities in weather modification at all, and Military Airlift Command was instructed to retain its capabilities in this area. For the military, the deciding factor was not the UN convention, but the fact that the weather modification technology had little utility or military payoff as a weapon of war. By 1978, the DoD claimed that its operational programs were directed solely at fog and cloud dispersal. Really? Yeah. Military payoff? Using weather as a weapon of war? Not much of a payoff. My God. We've been naive generation after generation. Naive, just buying the horseshit. By the 1970s, the atmospheric science community, no longer dominated by the veterans of World War II, had trained a new generation of civilian PhDs who increasingly were funded by the National Science Foundation and NASA. The current situation, climate modification proposals have returned in force recently due to growing apprehension that global warming is real and will have real consequences. As the logic goes, if everyone is unwilling or unable to limit their greenhouse gas emissions, perhaps a few smart people can provide a technological fix for the climate. David Keith. So, I found it interesting. I hope most of you are still with me. When Congress, and it's all of what our government was doing is just obsolete today. But when they would hold public hearings, and when Congress would say, no more of this, you military guys, no more, the funding that the Department of Defense got for weather modification, it just went to other agencies. They just hid the funding in the Department of Commerce, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy. So, a lot of people think that the UN, that treaty, stopped our military. Do you really think that the United States doesn't violate treaties all the time? Please, please, please come out of that childlike thinking. So, you know, there's so much information on weather modification. And, you know, you think about here, Air Command and Staff College, Operational Defenses Through Weather Control in 2030. And this was 2009, a military document, and all you have to do is read the abstract. In fact, all you have to do is read one sentence. One sentence. Advances in technology are beginning to bring weather phenomena under our control. And you know what? It is under their control. Nanotechnology brought it under their control. A network of miniature balloons feeding and receiving data from four-dimensional variation computer model through a sensor and actor network. Artificial intelligence and nanotechnology has taken over weather. This is what we're living. What else do I have? 1965. Weather modification. Memorandum. There is so much evidence, so many documents. The funding, Federal Council for Science and Technology, U.S. Department of Commerce, weather modification. Archives, the Journal of Weather Modification. We have a Journal of Weather Modification? The Journal of Weather Modification. We've got an awful lot. And yet, we can't get through to people. Artificial rainmaking with laser system. June 2009. International Journal of Meteorology. What is wrong with me? 2010. laser rainmaking. They have so many methods of creating weather, modifying it, steering that jet stream, air masses, the air mass control. Air mass control. The nation which first learns to plot the paths of air masses accurately and learns to control the time and place of precipitation will dominate that globe. They will dominate. They will dominate the earth. Yeah. Okay. So, I'm not sure what happened, but they were claiming more big storms coming to the Northeast. Saw a lot of rain in California last night. If you guys know of what our weather has been doing for 24 hours, please leave a comment below. But the destruction of weather being used as a weapon all over the world is leaving millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of people suffering, killing an awful lot of animals. Those animals that survive suffer. These people are sick, twisted. They're beyond psychopaths. I mean, we need a new word for them. They're the evil that we are seeing now unfold because we didn't stop it in its tracks. Is now just really rolling all over a whole lot of the world. I wish we could fight, but instead all we can do is speak the information. Stay safe, everyone, and all links are below.